And I always said, research reports by analysts, you just measure their quality by the paper weight. If they're very heavy, then don't buy the shares. If they're very light, 2 pages or so, that is more likely to be a company that will perform well. And now we have these structured products, they have prospectuses of several hundred pages. It had to be a disaster. It had to be a disaster. But the cause, really, if we look for reasons of the disaster, is essentially that the Federal Reserve allowed this leverage to occur. And I think, if I compare the Federal Reserve to, say, a barman, now you may argue the barman is not responsible if in his pub everybody gets drunk. That is to some extent correct, but if the barman gives out drinks for free and he gives it to children, that they get drunk is of course normal. Now the barman doesn't need to have morals, basically. He's interested in his business and that people come back, and the barman is very smart. He doesn't see to it that everybody's totally drunk every day. He wants the repeat customers, so he keeps them alive. So when they are about to get drunk, he sends them home. But the Federal Reserve, aside from providing money to the system and credit to the system, should have a moral responsibility, in my opinion. And they should have seen that there was a tremendous abuse of credit occurring, especially by people who are not very sophisticated. But what the Fed did under Mr. Greenspan, and also Mr. Bernanke, because he became Fed governor in 2002, and also another architect of easy monetary policies was Mishkin, is essentially to encourage people who couldn't afford to buy a home to actually buy homes with subprime loans. That they encouraged. And they also saw the increased leverage occurring on Wall Street and in the banking system, and they didn't do anything about it. Because when you think of it, in a normal society, say you have a local bank in the Philippines, its business should actually be to collect deposits from Filipinos, whether they live here in the Philippines or overseas, gather these deposits together, and then make loans to other people that require money for expanding their business or for purchases and so forth. But the bank is not supposed to gamble with its capital. It should have a social responsibility, and its prime objective should be the safety of its depositors and not to gamble with the money that comes in all kinds of products.
Yeah, so the markets seem to have spoken. The damage continues.
Yeah, the markets. The problem is the markets know who brought us into this trouble. Largely the Federal Reserve, and to some extent also the SEC and other agencies like housing agencies that allowed Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to build up a leverage of 1 to 150, and so nobody trusts these characters anymore. There's no trust. And also, I think the market understands one thing. Even a bailout package of $700 billion, and believe me, the bailout package will at least be $3 to $5 trillion. But even $5 trillion on a total credit market that is now essentially 3.5 times GDP is not a lot of money. Because the losses that have occurred through the depreciation of home prices and through the depreciation of equity prices, of course, much more than $5 trillion. So the market is not totally stupid. Secondly, the authorities, they basically talk about the financial crisis. But the market is also concerned that the earnings of corporations will be very disappointing over the next 12 months. I think that is now the reason why the market has been so weak. Because the first reason was credit problems. Now the market is waking up and says, oh, credit problems, if banks don't want to lend, and individuals don't want to borrow, the consequence is, of course, a recession, and in a recession, corporate profits will decline very, very substantially.
So, having said this, I mean, a lot of the markets have declined 50%. If you take a look at the some of the indexes, they have declined 30-40%. How far are we from the bottom? I mean, it seems like we are not.
Well, I mean, this is a very difficult question. You never know exactly where the bottom will be. But I'd like to introduce another thought. In 1987, between August 87 and October 19th, when the market crashed, the Dow Jones went down by 41%. In other words, in 3 months we went down 41%.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a low, and then the markets went up again and everything was fine. That was essentially a crash, and it was a correction in a bull market. The reason I don't believe that the current decline is a correction in a bull market is that this decline, if you look back, occurred in slow motion. You have the housing stocks, the housing company stocks, they peaked out already in June 2005. Then the subprime lenders peaked out in the summer of 2006. And then the financial stocks in the summer of 2007. And then some other stocks continued to go up, even as the market peaked out in October 2007. Some stocks like steel companies and iron ore companies, the mining companies in general, continued to go up. And now recently they turned down dramatically. I mean, US Steel has dropped 70% in something like 2 months. So I think that this decline has been spreading like a cancer through various asset classes, one after the other. And I think it is due to this process of deleveraging I mentioned to you, where credit growth has slowed down very considerably. And clearly the credit bubble has burst. It's not going to come back anytime soon. That I guarantee you. And whenever you look at financial history and you look at the bubble that burst, say the gold bubble burst in 1980, it changed the fundamentals of gold. It was not attractive for 20 years. The Japanese bubble burst in 1989. The Nikkei was at 39,000. We're now at 9,000. And this is now almost 20 years later. When a bubble bursts, it gives a very clear signal to market participants that the fundamentals of that region or sector or industry or company, that it's changed. Or you take the Nasdaq bubble, it peaked out in March 2000. We're still down more than 60% from the peak. But that bubble, when it burst, it gave a signal. Technology is not as good as people expected. It may not grow as much as people expected or not grow at all. So the fact that the credit bubble has burst is very clear signal that the global economy is in trouble. And in my opinion, big trouble. I mean, not small trouble, big trouble.
Yeah. Just going back, I haven't really studied this bubble that burst in the past, but how quick? Yeah, you mentioned how quick did the global economy react to these bubbles? I mean,
well,
they were
I mean,
contained, right?
in general, that's a good question. If the bubble is concentrated, say, in a very limited sector, I remember in 1978 when Atlantic City opened up, there was the first bubble in gaming stocks, because Resource International built at that time the first casino, and its stock went from like $3 to $170, also in a huge short squeeze. And that bubble burst. But you have to see, if the bubble is just in Atlantic City casinos, it has no impact on a $10 trillion US economy.
Mm-hmm.
So isolated bubbles in one sector of the economy usually will not have a huge impact on the rest of the economy. Or the Japanese bubble and Taiwanese bubble in year 89, when they burst, actually they didn't have much of an impact on the global economy. because it was very concentrated in these two countries and not in the rest of the world.